TK here, TK and Drinks, and it's a Friday afternoon and we're live? What? Yeah, so today we are going to be doing an interview. We're having another one of our Inside the Mead Maker Studio interview sessions. We're going to be talking with the cats from the Great British Mead Company all the way over at Oxfordshire, England. Looks like they've already popped in over here, so let's go ahead and send them a request, and we'll always British Mead Company was able to join. What? We were just doing this thing. Invite. There we go. Invite sent. So we were just doing this thing live. We made sure to practice that it would work. So what's going on, Tony? Always appreciate you when you pop in. We were just practicing this live because we wanted to make sure. There we go. Instagram was trying to give me some sort of nonsense message about this doesn't work. I was like, no, we just tried. We practiced.
There seem to be a couple of other requests that pop up so you can share it on your feed as well. That seems to be a bit of a distraction, but we seem to have worked it out well, so well done.
Hey, as long as we got it working now, that's what really matters. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so my name's Simon, and I run Great British Mead Company. My wife does all of the admin and financial side of things, and I put all the mead together. So we're based in Oxfordshire in England. I personally have been making mead for 30 years, and we've been running the business as Great British Mead for the last 10.
Wow, 10 years as a commercial meadery. That's we don't have a lot of those here in America that have lasted quite that long. And you said you've been making mead for how long before that?
So I actually started making mead in 1992.
Oh, wow.
Like a lot of mead makers, I started off in Viking Saxon reenactment and then in medieval reenactment. And mead is one of those things that reenactors like to drink. I think one of the great things about mead is that you can wake up in the morning with a fairly clear head. And if you're going to be running around a battlefield in woolen clothing and metal armor and flinging swords and spears around, you want to have a clear head. So not only is mead a historically accurate drink, it's also one that doesn't necessarily give you a hangover. So that's how I was introduced to mead.
Nice. Oh, so you're introduced through, you said historical reenactment. So was it somebody that brought a commercial bottle, or was it a homebrew that somebody had brought around?
Well, do you know, I don't really know. I think somebody just passed me a bottle of mead around the campfire one evening, and I was like, wow, what is this incredible drink? Yeah. And they said, what's mead? And I asked the ultimate question, what's mead? And they're like, it's a drink made with honey, alcoholic drink made with honey. I was like, this is amazing, you know. So initially, you'd have to sort of like go around the off licenses and liquor stores, whatever, trying to find somebody who sold mead, which of course would have been some sort of commercially available mead. Right. Ultimately, it was just easier to make my own. And so I found a local beekeeper. I've got some honey. I think I probably bought a book, with some recipes in, started experimenting, and eventually I, having gone through lots of different options, lots and lots of demijohns, I then came up with the mead that I'm drinking here, which is called Alfred's Mead. I live in a town called Wantage. Wantage was the birthplace of King Alfred the Great. A lot of people know about King Alfred the Great. And so my first mead that I made was called Alfred's Mead. It was a mead made with honey from rapeseed. Rapeseed's very butterscotchy, very caramelly, makes a really good mead. And then I added oranges for a bit of nutrient and ginger for a bit of kick. And people really seem to like it. So for many years, that was the only mead I made. And then we started moving into fruit meads as my knowledge and understanding of mead grew. And then we do a lot of herbal meads, a lot of metheglins as well. And this has really come from my sort of growing interest in the history of mead, why people made mead, how people made mead, and the variations in the possibilities for making mead as well. So fruit mead's obviously a really good way of utilizing fruit that would otherwise go to waste. You're retaining all of the nutritional benefits of the fruit by adding to the honey and fermenting. And then, of course, for the herbal meads, you've got the medicinal or magical properties of the plants or herbs. And you're then infusing those in a drink which will preserve, it won't go off. So really, those were early medicines, I guess. So obviously these days we're not allowed to promote alcohol as a health benefit, or an alcoholic drink as a health benefit. So it's really all about colour and taste. So aside from all the different honeys making different meads, you've got all the extra things like the fruits and the plants, the herbs, that create different flavors. And this is why we've now got such a really big range, about 14, 15 different types of mead that we make.
Nice.
And they all sell really well, and there's a very few of our meads that don't sell well. One of our biggest sellers, oddly, is coffee mead, which is the least historical mead of all. Coffee mead, unsurprisingly, sells really well through our website, mostly to online gamers. So people are playing things like League of Legends, stuff like that. And the great thing about the internet is you can share a URL. And I guess somebody bought a bottle of our coffee mead, they were drinking it whilst playing online, and telling people how good it was, and shared the URL, and that URL has sort of spread throughout the gaming community, and we get into double figures every week for our coffee meads, and they're almost all people who've found the link through an online gaming site, so that's quite cool.
So you guys have become like a little viral trend in the gaming community over there. That's freaking awesome, man. I don't think I've heard that from anybody else anywhere, that they've had some sort of like really cool niche clientele build up like that. That's very cool.
Well, actually, I drink black coffee, and I often put honey in the black coffee, and I thought, wouldn't it be really good if I put coffee in the mead? So actually what we do is to produce what you might call a traditional mead, and I then infuse that with fresh ground coffee. So rather than boiling up a coffee and adding honey, I actually put the coffee in afterwards, and it means you've got a cold brewed coffee. It's really smooth, all the aroma and flavour of the coffee. So obviously a coffee mead is not for everybody, but for those people that like coffee or like honey or like mead, it's a winner. It's just such a nice drink. And obviously if you're trying to keep awake playing online gaming, I guess it's perfect, isn't it? So
yeah. No, of the coffee meads that I've had, and I'm not a big coffee drinker as it is. My wife's a huge coffee drinker. And of the coffee meads I've had, so many of them, like you said, when they ferment with it or when they brew it and add it in, it always gets this like green vegetable, like green bell peppery type of taste. And the few that I have had is in a situation like yours, where you almost treat it more like a vanilla or like a spice or something. You're dry bagging it in post fermentation and letting letting it work its magic that way. So I would imagine that your coffee one, it would be one that I would rather enjoy. So I'm excited to get to try that someday in the however far away future.
Well, actually, we had a bit of a rebranding a few years ago, and prior to that, I had very specific names for my meads. Obviously, Alfred's Mead was my first. My blackberry mead was known as Woden's Mead, because that's the mead of poetry mixed from the blood of the poet. And the blackberry mead was a perfectly good name, Woden's Mead, for that. And my coffee mead was known as Berserker Mead. But I came to realise that not only if I was growing my range of meads, I'd have to come up with this whole name thing for every single mead, which is a bit of a pain. But also there's a lot of people who make meads called Berserker Mead, and they're all different. So we've really simplified it, particularly from the point of view of being on a shelf. It's like supermarket style shelf. So it literally has mead, and say coffee mead, blackberry mead, apple mead, whatever. And so we've simplified it, so it's no longer Berserker Mead. And the whole idea of the coffee buzz and going berserk, I thought was great, but it's now just plain and simple coffee mead, but it's absolutely delicious.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword that marketing employs. You could come up with this really cool line with all these unique characters, but like you said, then you got to develop it, and it takes all this time and energy. Or you can do something very minimalistic, where everything's kind of uniform, streamlined with very small changes. And I think both of them can work. It's just a matter of your personal marketing strategy. And from your guys' bottles, I like the cool one that had those cartoon characters on them, but I really like the way you guys had it. Have it now. It sits well. I imagine it would sit well on shelf with contemporary grape wines and stuff like that. It's going to feel very home on a regular store shelf.
Yeah, well, we've kept the sort of cartoony character for the Alfred's Mead bottle, not just because it's now a 30th anniversary mead,
Oh, yeah.
because I've been making it for that length of time. But I've got a really great graphic designer who's done all of my label design stuff for me, and he did such great work in creating these characters that I thought it was appropriate to keep at least one of them. So Alfred's Mead has got the Alfred sort of caricature on there.
Yeah.
Probably very different from the real King Alfred, who apparently did suffer from health issues and probably wasn't much of a drinker. But nevertheless, we've taken a few liberties with his name and image. But jolly King Alfred drinking his mead is a very happy man. So.
Oh yeah, no, and I can be on board with that. It's your first mead. It's the pilot. It's the flagship. It's got to be the, it's got to be have something to set itself a little bit different from your other lines.
Well, and actually, when we're when we're doing sort of market stalls and we're chatting to the public, we get asked a lot of questions over and over again. And one of those questions is, which is your favourite? And it's like choosing a favourite child. But in reality, my favourite mead will just change from month to month. Depends what time of year it is, what kind of, at the moment, actually, one of my favourites is the apple mead. Apple mead is based on a French mead called Chouchen they make in Brittany. And rather than mixing honey and water, that's mixing apple juice and water. So we've mixed buckwheat honey with fresh apple juice. That's been barrel aged for 3 years, and it's absolutely delicious. If I have to answer the which is your favourite mead question, Alfred's Mead will be my easy answer because it was my first.
No, I completely understand that. It's like I said, it's going to have that special place in your heart because it's what set forth this commercial journey and got you to the place where you're at today.
Yeah.
When we were talking before we jumped online, one thing I want to touch back on, because I'm not sure everybody quite understand the difficulty of acquiring mead. You said you started home brewing and stuff back in '92, or had your first mead. If you were around early '90s, so you said you were going through the yellow pages straight up in the phone book, looking for places that sold mead or that might sell mead or might know where you could find somebody who sells mead. That is something I don't think a lot of anybody under the age of, say, like 35 is really going to comprehend how that, the depths of something like that.
Well, obviously, you can imagine that if you're going to some kind of like historical event, there might be a stall there serving mead, and if you happen to encounter that stall and you try some, you could discover it that way. But in terms of getting it, before the internet, now you can go on Amazon or you'll find a website or whatever. But the Yellow Pages was this like huge directory, and it just listed everybody doing every single service or trade. I think Yellow Pages are sort of quite a few countries around the world. But I would literally, I'd be like, right, I live here, the battle reenactment's over there, and I'd just literally go through the Yellow Pages trying to find a liquor store somewhere, and you'd literally ring them up and go, do you sell mead? And they'd often say, no, we don't, but we can get it. And I'd be like, right, well, I'm passing by next Friday afternoon. Can you get some mead? How many bottles would you like? Well, I'll take 6.
Yeah.
And there used to be there used to be a mead called Lagershall mead, and that was made in England. It's no longer made anymore. And I took quite a liking to this mead over some of the other ones I tried. So I was always trying to find this particular mead. Ultimately, the flavour profile of Lagershall mead dictated Alfred's Mead. So even though it's not an exact replica, Alfred's Mead is a nod to the flavour profile of Lagershall mead, which, as I say, you can't get anymore anyway.
Yeah.
So that was kind of an influence, and I thought, well, the meads I've tried, of course, you can start trying to replicate what you like. And I find this a lot chatting to amateur mead makers, in that they've bought a particular mead, and that's then influenced them to try and replicate that themselves. And of course that doesn't always work, because honeys are different and production methods are different. So people often say, well, how can I change the taste and the flavour of mead? And you end up in an ongoing conversation, which is really good fun.
Yeah, that's one thing with mead making, is there's so many variables that are at play, even with such a, even if you're just working with a traditional, like you said, even if you're working with like a same varietal of honey, say like a Scottish heather honey, if you happen to, stumble across some of that. This batch from that batch is going to be completely different from this hive from the time of the year it was harvested. So you could, attempt at your best to recreate something, and it's a total roll of the dice if it's going to come out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I only use honey from beekeepers in, so maybe like a 100-mile area around me. So Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Northamptonshire. So a lot of the honey tends to be wildflower honey.
Nice.
We also get quite a lot of rapeseed grown in this area as well. Rapeseed is an absolute nightmare for hay fever sufferers, but it does make a really interesting, rich honey. And one of the aspects about rapeseed honey is it sets really hard, really quickly. So, of course, beekeepers want to be able to acquire the honey from the honeycomb. And they then want to be able to put it into jars and monetize that, selling it by the pound in a jar. But rapeseed honey sets really quickly. So often we'll get an email from a beekeeper saying, look, I've got like 200 kilograms of rapeseed honey. Can I sell it to you now before it goes hard? And they can then get their buckets back. If it's set hard, you've got to get the Stanley blade out and literally cut the honey out of the bucket in order to melt it down in the water. So we don't have a really wide range of honeys because we're only using local beekeepers. But what that does mean is we've got quite a good consistency for our meads.
Which is, hey, there's a lot to be said for consistency. If people go out and buy something, they want to know that when they're buying it again, that they're going to get that same continued value that they in quality that they're used to. So actually, I think that's probably a benefit to you more than it is a hindrance. It's kind of unfortunate that you don't have a lot of varietals, but I'd say in that toss-up, I would take the consistency over local varietals.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's what's really interesting, particularly about making our traditional mead. We use the wildflower honey for that, and because I keep back some of my mead for my own use, of course, it's really interesting comparing a traditional mead that I made with last year's honey to a traditional mead I made with a honey from 3 or 4 years ago. So it's come from the same beekeeper, it's come from the same sort of area, but yeah, the honey does really vary year on year, and of course that's then comes through in the mead. So a traditional mead from 2 or 3 years ago has had 2 or 3 years more aging, but the honey being different again means that year on year the traditional meads do really vary, and customers notice this as well.
Oh yeah, and then certain batches will be they get sought after by certain people because they like that the subtle nuance differences that one had versus other ones. Honey is kind of like gives it that terroir, like how grapes and the soil and everything do for wine. That's what the way I've always looked at honey. It adds that terroir, that uniqueness, character that varies from batch to batch, year to year.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say that is that wines are famous for certain years being better than others. For different reasons to honey perhaps, but this is kind of where all mead makers would like to see mead being at, in that certain years will be valued over others. Quite how we get mead to the elevated status of wine is yet to be seen, but it'd be that's the kind of thing I think as an industry we need to be generating, is promoting certain aspects of the drinks that we're producing.
I think one of the biggest holdups for me taking that next step in growth as far as being like widely available is the pricing on it. I'm looking at your guys' bottles online. They're 18 pounds 50, which is about $24 American for a 750 bottle. That's an incredibly fair price. I mean, there's a lot of mead makers in America that struggle to hit those types of prices. Even for their 750 bottles, it's more in like the $28 to $30 range. Let alone a lot of mead makers in America are doing 375 bottles, and those are even in the $24, $25 range. So I think that those prices are going to continue to be the biggest hurdle for mead getting that next plateau in popularity.
I think certainly pricing is a very individual thing. I've always tried to base my pricing because I know how much it costs me to produce a bottle of mead. You've got all of your tax and all of your, your payments you've got to be making for alcohol duty and everything else. So, you've got a base price for how much it costs you to make something. But in terms of how much I'm charging for a bottle of mead, I'm thinking, what would I pay myself?
Right.
Ultimately, because if you're comparing mead to wine, if you're saying mead is a honey wine, you're essentially drinking mead in exactly the same way that you drink wine. So you can get a cheap bottle of wine and you can get a more expensive bottle of wine, but you still drink it in the same way. I think from my point of view, I would want to keep my prices as realistic as possible.
Sure.
So that it becomes more affordable for people who are drinking it. Because I can't drink 10,000 litres of mead a year. But that's what I'm producing at the moment. And we're pretty much selling what we're producing.
Right.
I think if I was charging £30 for a bottle, I would probably be selling less. So I'm selling less, I have to make less. Yeah, that's just my outlook on it. I try and keep my prices as affordable as possible while still making the business profitable.
And the best quality product you can. You're not trying to shortchange your customers. You're trying to find that happy medium of where can I buy, how much is it going to cost me to buy a quality ingredients to make a quality product while still keep my product at a reasonable enough price to where people are going to continue to come back and buy it. And I don't find myself in this more expensive niche category for people who are looking for more expensive bottles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's also relevant to say that the honey that we use comes from beekeepers rather than from a commercial venture.
Right.
I'm either buying rapeseed honey that beekeepers don't really want, or I'm buying, you're familiar with the term cooking honey or baking honey.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously honey starts to ferment, and once honey starts to ferment, beekeepers can't sell it as honey.
Right.
So, I'm not going out and buying high priced commercial honey. I'm buying honey from beekeepers that have got honey they can't really use. And so I'm getting a good price from them, as opposed to paying a premium price for honey. And that means that I can then reflect that fair price that I'm paying for the honey in the fair price I'm then charging for the mead. And that's kind of the way. Honey is a very sustainable product. Mead is a very sustainable product. And I think that the pricing structure of mead also needs to be sustainable. That's my basic business ethos, is to make proper mead using proper ingredients, with no artificial ingredients, no sugars, no syrups, but making proper mead for proper affordable prices. That's my own personal point of view. Luckily, people like the mead that we make, and that we sell the mead that we make, and we make a profit in the business. That helps me to keep my prices as low as possible.
That's it. Hey, that's a good thing whenever your business can be profitable. Do you have a regular 9 to 5, or is this just your only gig?
So I'm a busy electrician. I've been an electrician since 1987, and I've been a mead maker since 1992. So the businesses are very much parallel. I used to joke that I was 80% electrician and 20% mead maker, because I do Monday to Thursday electrics, and then Fridays would be my mead day. In reality, I'm doing a lot more meading now than I used to. So Fridays is an exclusive day for mead making, simply because of the amount of time you need for cleaning, sterilizing, producing, and then cleaning, sterilizing, tidy up if we can get home again. But the weekends can be quite busy, particularly during the summer, doing events. I do a lot less events now than I used to. We used to be out almost every weekend at reenactment fairs and everything else. Luckily, there have been a lot more meaderies in the UK crop up in the last few years. A lot of these people running these meaderies are younger, full of enthusiasm, and prepared to go out and do all these medieval markets. So previously I was one of the few mead makers, and I was in demand. Now there are a lot more mead makers. It means I can take a bit more of a back seat and focus on our online sales and everything else. We have
Nice.
a very well established community of people who keep coming back, repeat custom. So I would say probably the majority of our sales are online now. But I do select events. I've got one on Sunday, but most of my events are local. So I don't need to travel far. I don't need to stay overnight.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I've kind of settled into, as the Mead business has grown, you know, I'm doing slightly less electrical work, but I'm almost putting less effort into it because it's sort of self-propelling almost with the
Gotcha.
with the orders.
So, do you have a tap room as well, or are you solely a production and online sales and event sales?
Yeah, exactly. So I would I live in quite a small rural market town. There isn't really the demographic for a tap room.
Gotcha.
We recently had a Mead festival in London that was hosted by Gosnell's Mead, and
Yep.
they've got a tap room down on the Bermondsey Beer Mile. That's a really vibrant community of people who go out and experience all these different outlets. I know quite a few people do have tap rooms. We just don't have the demographic in my area.
Gotcha.
And I'm stocked in quite a lot of bars in Oxford itself. You know,
Nice.
we've done a couple of tap takeovers over the years. That's been quite good fun. But my license allows me to do off sales from my premises, but generally speaking, we get very few visitors because that has to be by arrangement. And it's quite
Gotcha.
nice that way. It means I can sort of hide away in my happy little meadery, producing mead, posting stuff off, getting the van packed, going off to events and coming back. And it's sort of a air of peace and quiet and calm, really, to be honest.
Yeah, there's something to be said about not having to interrupt your day to stop one mode of work to go shift over to another mode of work. If you can just stay in that production mode all day
Yeah.
long, crank out bottles, and like you said, sell them online, sell them at the markets and stuff, or at the other bars. I think that's a lot easier. Having a tap room is convenient, but also very time consuming.
It is, and actually, to be honest, though, the unit that I've got, and I'm really lucky to have it, is on a quiet industrial estate. We're sheltered from the sun. The
Oh, nice.
temperature in the meadery is even though it's been 30 degrees here today, it's still quite warm even this evening. The temperature of the meadery is quite consistent, relatively cool. It's all in shade. And you know, I get in there, I've got the radio on,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're happily doing your job, and sometimes I forget the time, it's later than I think. Sometimes it's rained heavily and I've not noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of quite happily just working away in my own little world, really. It's quite calming, but things just plod along really happily.
Nice. So you had mentioned like you get your honey from a certain radius around from the meadery, and you like to support local businesses. Do you get all your fruit and adjuncts and stuff from as close as possible, or do you have to source a lot of those from outside the region?
No, it's a good question. So there's a small village just outside of Wantage called Harwell. Harwell is a huge fruit producing area.
Ooh.
And if you look back historically, people would have utilized fruit that would otherwise have gone to waste. All
Yeah.
of the ripe fruit falling off the trees, it's about to be spoiled. So what you do, you mix it with the honey, you make fruit meads. Fruit meads have been found in recipes going back like to 6,500 BC.
Yeah.
So fruit meads are a very historical way of making mead. A lot of non-mead people are very surprised to find out that mead is something other than just honey. And so because there's so much fruit in the area, we have a number of fruit farms locally. One lady in particular who runs a small holding, she now picks most of my blackberries for me. And this was
Whoa.
something I had to go and do myself in previous years. But she just picks the blackberries, sticks them in a freezer. They then come across to me. Last year we had a huge supply of green gauge plums, of damson plums.
Ooh, yeah.
We get loads of strawberries. But it's all fruit that is either not quite perfect, i.e. it's not ideal for supermarket shelves.
Right.
So again, it means that I get the ingredients at a lower cost, but that the fruit producers get money for the produce that would otherwise be thrown away or wasted.
Yep.
So this really links into the sustainability of mead making as a whole. And it's just, I think, working clever, getting the best ingredients you can for alcohol production, but at the fairest price possible, which means, again, I can then pass those prices on, or those price reductions on to the customer.
No, and I love it. Using the fruits that are at, beyond peak ripeness usually means that most of the sugar is already available and ready to be, ready to be fermented. Chop it up, mash it up a little bit, maybe freeze it, throw some pectic enzymes in there, and you're good to go.
I mean, there are definitely times when I wish I didn't do fruit meads. It is the messiest thing in the world sometimes. De-skinning and de-stoning and pulping and sieving, and you think surely it's just easier to just make just mead.
Oh yeah.
I really like what the fruit meads do. It's really interesting to try different honeys with different fruits, and so I've got to a point now where I know, or I think I know, which honey to blend with particular fruits to get the best results.
Do you pick different yeast strains to go with your mellow mellows versus your traditionals or anything like that, or do you pretty much just stick with one strain across the board?
It's one of those questions that's much talked about online. I generally tend to do wild fermentation now. This is something I moved into 7 or 8 years ago. There's actually a really good book called The Art of Fermentation by Sandor Katz, which is a brilliant book. And of course, it's not just alcoholic drinks, it's food that's fermented, sauerkraut being a good example.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a cider producer. He was saying to me, I only do wild fermentation, and that led me to understand and to explore it a lot more. So almost all of my meads are using the wild fermentation process now, which is much easier than I thought it would be. It just takes a lot of understanding as to how to understand and manage it.
To me, that is such a foreign concept to intentionally do everything as a wild ferment. So you just do an open ferment until it kicks. Like, how do you keep your tolerance control? Because you don't know what strain you're going to get. Not that yeast knows how to read, knows what its tolerance is supposed to be anyway.
Yeah.
But
well, see, it's really interesting because if we're talking historically. See, nowadays, because a lot of the yeast that have been identified mostly with like the French wine production, you can now go and buy a D47 or an E118 out of a packet and warm it up and off you go. It's really easy to buy a yeast now and to look up the characteristics of yeast. But in the same way, you can if we're beer making, you can look up the characteristics of a hop. Whereas previously people would just grow hops and they'd put them into the beer. Whereas, with fermentation, people wouldn't have packets of yeast. Historically, everybody would wild ferment. And the fact is that I don't really think anybody ever worried about it. I think it was just something that occurred. So with the brewery, you'd have like a louvered vents in the ceiling, and the yeast would actually arrive in, and that would cause the fermentation to happen. I think people just recognize that that's how it worked. Once you get into wild fermentation, once you start to understand the process and become comfortable with it, I guess it's a little bit like, to use a modern example, having an electric vehicle. If you don't own an electric vehicle, range anxiety is all people talk about. Anybody who owns an electric vehicle doesn't really have range anxiety. Once you understand how something works, you're less concerned about it. So it's only almost like a fear of the unknown.
Right.
So wild fermentation is something I think every alcohol producer, mead producer should try doing. Just to see how it works. And once you understand how it works, particularly if you read up about it, it really is a completely natural process, and it does what nature has always done.
So we got a question here. It says, what's the highest alcohol content you've ever gotten from a wild ferment?
So generally speaking, they'll go to sort of like 14%, something like that.
Wow.
If you, it's almost like a stepping stone process. So you'll have some yeast which will go from maybe 0 to 2. Other yeast will then step in and go from 2 till 6%. You'll then have other yeast that will then wake up and go from like 6 to 10%. But of course, you've got your original gravity reading, and then you've got your final gravity reading. Ultimately, that's what dictates what your ABV is.
Right.
You're going to determine how much sugars in the honey that you're putting into the drink in the first place. That gives you your original gravity. Let yeast do the work in exactly the same way it would by putting in a packet yeast, and ultimately then it's going to ferment dry. You're going to get down to that magic number you're looking for, so you can take one from the other and end up with a figure you first calculated you were hoping to get. But wild yeast does exactly the same job as a packet yeast. You just have more patience.
That's so. Do you leave it open top the entire time to allow for different yeast to constantly be exposed to the ferment and hope to grab those strains that can get you to those higher tolerances?
So
or is there a certain...
One of the things about using fruit in mead as well is that you've got yeast present in the fruit.
Yeah.
So those yeasts are already there. So actually, really, you don't necessarily need to have an open ferment. You can literally just stir it all up, close the lid on it. You've got your airlock. Those yeasts that are already present will just naturally work in the same way as if you'd introduced the yeast via a packet.
Do you use any sort of nutrients or anything to help jazz it up a bit, or you just let them go completely all natural?
So that depends on the drink. So fruit contains nutrients anyway. So with the fruit meads, you're introducing nutrients from the fruit. Obviously, if you're making a traditional mead, you've got to add a nutrient in the way that you would in any sort of ferment.
Man, so this is really flies in the face, a flag in the face of a lot of, what a lot of people are talking about, at least here in the States, as far as like, you need to do specific styles of step nutritions, and you can't expose anything. You need to clean all your fruit off. You don't want any chance of wild anything getting in there, because there's more chance of like infection. I do like what you're saying, though. It makes complete sense about the up until say just to be on the liberal side, say past 40 years or so, haven't been able to get too many commercial strains of yeast. It was all wild ferments. If it took off, it took off. If it didn't, it didn't. There was no yeast nutrients. I'm just surprised that you go that route, given potential red tape and hurdles that you might have to go through from like government regulations.
To be honest with you, I have never ever had. I mean, hand on heart, touch wood, and all that. I've never ever had a spoiled batch of mead.
Nice.
I've never ended up with a vinegar brew. I know some people say they have. But in all the years I've been making mead, I've never ever had a bad batch. And obviously sterilizing stuff, particularly from a modern point of view, where I'm much more aware of the need to sterilize, the use of Camden tablets, obviously for taking chlorine out of the water, that's very important. So I think the important thing, in all respects, is understanding and preparation. I've looked in, for example, following the whole Tonsa method with step nutrition. I have tried that. I don't necessarily like the taste that all of that added nutrition gives to a mead. I think a lot of people are probably aware of what yeast nutrient is made of. And I don't think it lends itself. I don't think putting that much nutrient in is good for the flavor. And I don't necessarily think that fermenting, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I can ferment a mead to, dry in like 6 weeks or something. I don't think that's necessarily good for mead either, fermenting it quickly. I know some people would disagree with that, but I like to have a nice natural ferment that can take 2 or 3 months to do the fermentation. I then rack it off and let it settle. That has another 6 months of settling before it then goes into the barrel to age. So, my process start to finish is probably 18 months. But I'm really happy with the smoothness and the clarity and the mouthfeel of the meads, and that's reflected in the feedback that we get from our customers as well.
That's awesome. There's so few places in America that do it that route. The vast majority of places are, like you're saying, they're using that step feed, the
Yeah.
I can never remember what's called, the Tunsa or whatever it is, and
TONSA.
yeah, I mean, I know don't know Sergio, but I know of Sergio, the guy who created all that and the whole everything behind it. I think it's, like you said, if mead and alcohol is produced for this many years without it, so just doesn't mean that it can't work in certain situations. But I do agree that it definitely develops a certain flavor profile,
Yeah.
because you're stuffing a lot of nutrients in there, and I think a lot of people, given the amount of yeast that they put in, under yeast and over nutrient their meats.
Yeah. I think
And
you're probably right. Absolutely.
and I'm always looking for something new. So I'm in no way, trying to, go against what you're saying. It's interesting to me, and it's something that I think I might consider trying because, I'm always trying to something new and different than I've done last time. As much as I enjoy a process with as little variability and change, I think trying a wild ferment would be a really unique process.
It's really interesting. I mean, a good example is that when you first start doing something, you're not necessarily full of knowledge,
Right.
but you're willing to try. You're willing to experiment. When I first started making mead, I used to add the honey to the water and bring it to the boil. And one of the interesting outcomes of that is when you bring the honey and water mixture to the boil, you end up with this very sweet tasting scum rise to the surface. And I would be there with my sieve and I'd be sieving off all of this scum. And I would see that in my head at the time as impurities in the honey that I was having to skim off, and that having boiled my honey to destruction and then fermented it, I would then have this lovely clear liquid, and I thought that was because I'd boiled off all the impurities. It was only some time later when I recognized that I didn't actually need to boil the honey, that by boiling the honey I was destroying all of the enzymes and minerals that were present in the honey. All the benefits of the honey itself were being lost by boiling the honey. And so I stopped doing that. I simply started to mix the honey, the raw honey, and I only use raw honey now, certainly, but raw honey mixed with warm water, allowing it to naturally ferment itself. And I think my meads are better for doing it that way. That's my personal opinion. But that's how I make mead. Now, of course, the Tonsa approach is applying science to mead production. And if you're starting off in mead production, it's much, much easier to apply the Tonsa method than it is to do my method. But that doesn't mean to say that having become more experienced, people who are using the step nutritional method to begin with won't try something else later on. And that's exactly where I'm at. I've just tried something else sort of down the line, and I've become happy with how that works.
Well, sure. So as somebody who's been in the meat game for 30 years, I'm sure there's very few things and few and far between the things that you haven't come across or tried or thought of. People already say there's no such thing as original thought. And for somebody who's been in it for 30 years, I'm pretty sure you've come across everything, you've seen everything. And I think it's really cool that you've got this wild process that works for you. It's something I was unaware of, and I'm glad that I got to talk to you and discover it. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. I think it's a wonderful thing.
But see, that said, I love to try meads from different mead producers.
Sure.
And as I said, there's been a growing league of new mead makers in the UK. And when I discover a new meadery, I will just go online and order some meads from them. So I have quite a collection of full, half full, and even empty bottles from different meaderies. And it's amazing how interesting and varied all of these drinks are. People are coming up with ideas that I hadn't thought of, using honeys that I don't have access to. You know, people are using all sorts of different ways of making their mead, but you know, really, ultimately, it's about taste and what suits your taste.
Right.
So you know, I quite like drinking red wine. There are red wines I really don't like, and some red wines I really do.
Yeah.
I'm a keen real ale drinker. There are some, I mean, for example, Citra hopped ales, really can't get on with those, never have. I like a good malt beer, you know. But there are some malt beers I like and some malt beers I don't. So of course, the same is always going to be for mead. It's a hugely varied drink. It's great that
Yeah.
so many people are making it, that more and more people are discovering mead. And it's just, it's a great community.
Absolutely. I'm in every time I do one of these interviews, I fall more in love with the Mead community. There's always people asking questions. I always get introduced to new thoughts and concepts and new ideas within the Mead world. And the one thing that is generally true that I see mostly in the Mead world that I don't see in a lot of other, like in the beer world, and I'm not really a big follower in the wine world, but is the camaraderie and the, you know, just that general teamwork and
Yeah.
the community, the mead community itself. You know, the brewing world, you get like it gets very cliquish. It seems like there's, you know, if you're not in this part of these breweries and stuff, you're not part of the cool kids club. But in mead, it seems to be very much more. There's a lot less of that, I guess I should say.
Willingness to share, I think, is the other thing, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, willingness
And
to share knowledge, willingness to share your experiences, willingness to help, like you said, reach out to these younger guys that are coming up when they have questions and share your ability
yeah.
and your knowledge to help them produce the best product they can, as opposed to being afraid of competition.
I mean, certainly, I think in terms of wine, beer, and gin, for example, it's a fairly heavily saturated market, but new people keep coming along, new drinks keep coming along, so that's absolutely fine. But I think with mead making, because it's a little bit more niche, when you talk about a beer enthusiast or a wine enthusiast, they're in a very large group. Whereas I think when you find a media enthusiast, we tend to get a bit more excited that you found somebody else who's enthusiastic about mead. And I think the conversation tends to be a bit more energetic, a bit more enlightened, and then the willingness to discuss and share ideas and recipes and techniques is just a little bit more fluid, really.
Absolutely. You know, it's like finding a ship in the night. It's like, you know, you didn't think you were going to stumble across somebody because they're so few and far between by comparison.
Yeah.
And you just get excited. And like you said, you have that energy and that passion about it. And I love it. I think it's a great thing. And I'm glad that it's not just here in America, but it does seem to hold true pretty much in the meat community across the world.
Yeah. And I'm amazed at how many meteors there are in the States overall. It's just phenomenal. And it's not necessarily, okay, you've got big organizations like the Society for Creative Anachronism, big medieval group, you know, and obviously there's a lot of mead drinking going on there and people come from different states or whatever. But yeah, it's just the fact that, you know, mead is a worldwide thing. It's every continent around the world where there are honeybees, there's some kind of ancient drink made with honey.
Yeah.
And that's never really got away. The fact that it's not well known is almost irrelevant because the people that know about it, you know?
Right. See, and you talk about different styles from around the world. I haven't had too many, but I feel like I've had probably more than the vast majority of people. I've had several different Polish styles. I've had a couple different Tej from, none from Ethiopia, but that, at least the Tej style.
Yeah.
But I haven't had anything from any like Asian cultures or anything like that. I think it'd be awesome to see what they were doing with their meads over in, you know, China, Japan, Korea. It would be freaking awesome.
Yeah. I was chatting to a guy from Thailand who was saying they have a honey that the bees get the pollen from a hallucinogenic plant, and the honey itself is mildly hallucinogenic, and said so they make a hallucinogenic mead out of this honey.
See,
you know?
And I'm here for all those wild things. That's all the unique things I want to try. I was talking to a guy in Australia. He said he gets his honey from a guy who takes his bees out into the bush somewhere and can get up to 90 different varieties. I'm like, 90 different varietals? Get like,
yeah,
it's astonishing the different you know, resources people have access to like that.
I'm going to say, where I am, I'm reasonably limited to rapeseed honey or wildflower honey.
Right.
And in the past, I've brought in orange blossom honey from America.
Mm-hmm.
And that had a really, really different taste than I was expecting it. Yeah, so, I've sort of have tried different honeys over the years, but because I stick mostly to the local honeys,
Yeah.
my meads tend to be the meads that I'm used to, and that's why it's so nice to try meads from other people who've got
Nice.
honey from different sources. I had there's a really nice mead over in Greece. There's a family there who they make olive oil, of course, but they also have heather honey. And they contacted me and said, would you like to do a trade? So I sent them one of my bottles of mead, and they sent me one of theirs. And it's such different drinks, really, really nice,
Yes.
But of course, the Greeks call mead the nectar of the gods. It's such a magical drink; it can only have come from the gods,
Yeah, that's that ambrosia, man. Got to get some of that. I would love to try a Greek mead. Anywhere from any place in Europe other than the ones I've had, I want to try. I want to try it all. Give it to me all.
So there's you could look it up. It's Sotirale Mead, and they're based in Sparta. Sotirle, I think. But reasonably easy to find. I think it's one of the few meads made in Greece these days. But it's a really rich red colour mead. It's quite syrupy, but absolutely delicious.
That's awesome. I'll have to reach out to them and see if they want to come on sometime and talk. That would be amazing.
I'll send you
We are running. Oh yeah, please do. We are running up almost to the hour mark, and I know you are. It is about 8 hours ahead of me. You're coming up on 10:30 over there. So I got a couple rapid fire questions I'd like to shoot at you. A little more get to know you type thing. See here. What's the first thing you think about in the morning when you get up?
Do you know, weirdly, I'm learning Greek on Duolingo. Having spoken about Greek, I go sailing in Greece every year. So in the morning, I get up and I do my Duolingo Greek. There's your answer.
Fair enough. Hot or cold?
Cold.
Toilet paper, hang over the front or drape over the back?
Over the front every time.
What was your first car you had?
Ford Fiesta.
A Ford Fiesta. Good to know that those are making their way everywhere for somebody's first car.
And they've just announced in the news today they're stopping making them after all these years.
They stopped making them here in America about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Burgers, pizza, or tacos?
Oh, I'm a burger man.
Same.
I like all three, but burgers would come first.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. Yeah. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Superpower? It'd have to be fly. I'd love to fly.
Flying would definitely be fun. I'd love to be able to just cruise around and check things out. What's the worst job you ever had?
Do you know, I've not really had many bad jobs, but my first job was stacking shelves in a supermarket, and that was fairly dull. But that paid for my driving lessons.
Hey, definitely been through that as well. We got to freaking take that first job to get that card. If you're going out to the pub, we do it. Do you guys have billiards in the pub? I'm assuming.
Yeah.
We probably got that from you guys.
Yeah. You never know.
If you're out at the pub, we doing billiards or darts?
I'm really bad at darts, but billiards I love.
There you go. If you could replace the action star in any movie, what would it be?
Oh, Superman.
Again, I've come from a guy who likes to fly. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, they say you're an electrician. I wasn't say if you weren't a mead maker, what would you be? But it sounds like you're already being an electrician. That's your trade there. So,
I do have
if you could meet,
if I could, like you get to a certain age and you think, I wish I'd done that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
But for many, many years, I thought I should really have been a Foley artist. The guy that does the sounds for films.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I've always thought that would have been a really cool job to have done.
Dude. Oh, I would love to do that. Hang out in that sound studio all day, breaking celery for bones and kicking shoes across the floor. And oh yeah, I'm here for all of that, man. I think we got the same heart on the inside, my man. Well, everybody, this is my man Simon from the Great British Mead Company over there in Oxfordshire. If you're not following him already, you should be. If you're in the UK, can you ship your bottles outside the UK, or how can we get your bottles if we're wanting some?
Well, I think it's difficult shipping them outside of the UK. I
Okay.
think there are implications depending on where you're sending it to, but we definitely post to Europe. I think
Okay.
posting to the States has its complications, but I think that's a state-by-state basis, really. So give it a try and see,
Sure.
if we can make it work.
Hey, there you go. If you're at any of the festivals up there, look for Simon. He may be there. He may not be there, but you are going to see him at the it was the British Mead Fest that was hosted by Gosnells.
Yeah,
Be there next year, I'm assuming.
Well, hopefully there'll be another one. They hosted the first UK Mead Festival earlier in the year. That was we had about 14 different mead producers from the UK. It was a really nice get together. Finally getting to meet people you've spoken to or seen online. And yeah, it's a good weekend. So hopefully there'll be a second Mead Festival coming up at some point.
Definitely. So go follow him on all his socials. If you're not already, you should be. Got some great content. Thank you again, Simon, for joining me today. I appreciate it. It was a great chat, and hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future.
It was good fun. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
You too. Have a good night.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you.
Well, that was awesome. I love talking to anybody I can about mead, especially people who have a completely different outlook and different knowledge set than I do. And that was phenomenal. I'm definitely going to be looking into doing a wild ferment in some way, shape, or form, especially since I have access to, whoa, what's fly in my face? Since I have access to some great honey right now where I'm at. I'm sure it's full of pollen and yeast and all those things that are going to be needed to make a great wild ferment. So thank you guys so much for this wild Friday afternoon interview from across the pond. Another great episode of Inside the Mead Maker Studio. Look for me next week where we'll be talking to, I believe, I'm not sure right this second, but I'll get a note out there. And yeah, so have a great night, everybody, or a great day, whatever it is. Great weekend coming up, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.